By lowering posted speeds on our roads or putting in place measures to ensure our drivers are adhering to safe limits, communities can minimize the severity of accidents and protect our vulnerable road users, such as pedestrians and cyclists. During today's program, our panelists will share strategies that their agencies have employed to improve safety and manage speeds in their communities, as well as lessons learned from their efforts. As you listen, we encourage you to consider how these strategies may apply in your communities. The webinar recording will be available on our MetroPlan Orlando YouTube channel, and everyone who has registered for today's webinar will receive a follow-up email with a link to that recording. I'm going to go ahead and kick things off by introducing our three panelists for today, starting with Chelsea Favero, who is the MPO Division Manager at Forward Pinellas, the countywide land use and transportation planning agency in Pinellas County over on the west coast of Florida. Chelsea will share lessons learned from a few initiatives that Forward Pinellas has pursued recently to improve safety and mobility outcomes in Pinellas County. Chelsea will be followed by Lori Trebitz, who is a roadway engineer supervisor with FDOT District 5, which covers our three-county planning area here at MetroPlan Orlando. Lori's going to share with us outcomes and lessons learned from the Orange Blossom Trail safety project that was completed here in Orlando. And finally, we have Fernando Navarrete, who is the legislative coordinator at the City of Los Angeles Transportation Department. Fernando is going to share with us how the city has pursued their speed management goals through advocacy and legislation. Before I turn things over to Chelsea, I want to give a quick reminder that you can use the Q&A button that's on your toolbar to ask questions throughout the program. We'll be answering as many of those questions as we can during the Q&A session after our presenters have concluded their presentations. And with that, I will go ahead and turn it over to Chelsea.
All right, thank you, Laura. Just trying to be able to advance the slides right now, and I do not currently have that ability.
Rachel will get that over to you just a second.
Okay. There we go. So not knowing totally who all is in attendance, I wanted to give just a brief overview of who Forward Pinellas is. So our agency has a dual purpose. We serve as both the MPO for Pinellas County, Florida, and also as the Pinellas Planning Council. And with that, we have countywide land use authority. We do have a single governing board for both agencies that is made up of what's about to be 19 local elected officials. And we serve 25 different local governments, including the county, our cities, and then also transit agencies and our regional partners. So we are located on the west coast of Florida. As was noted, we have just under 1 million residents. We see about 15 million annual visitors. And it's really our role as, as Forward Pinellas to guide development and redevelopment into the right places. Our land use side of the house kind of sets the upper limit of density and intensity countywide. And we try to align that vision really closely with the transportation planning that we do. A little background on Pinellas County. This was all the red in the map that you see there. This was land that was developed in Pinellas County in 1940. By 1980, it looked like this. And then in present day, once we add on the environmental lands, you can see that there really isn't any vacant developable land in Pinellas County. We are the most densely populated county in the state of Florida by a factor of 2. And so we're really all into redevelopment mode. We're also the 7th most dangerous in the nation for pedestrians. Our bicycle and pedestrian fatality rate is twice the national average. We see an average of 70 crashes a day, just in general, with speed being a primary factor. And of those 70 crashes, just over 2 on average are they result in a death or a serious injury. So our roadway network here in Pinellas has been primarily built since the 1940s, and it's primarily built on moving vehicles as fast as possible and as efficiently as possible. And that has really come at the detriment for safety for basically all users. So in Pinellas County, our transit network is wanting, to say the least. However, we were fortunate enough to be able to launch the Sunrunner service in our county about 2 years ago. This is a bus rapid transit project where we have buses running in dedicated and shared lanes from downtown St. Petersburg out to St. Pete Beach. So you can see in the upper right-hand corner, the ridership on that route over time. There is a bit of a drop-off in October of 2023, and that's when we started, or our local transit agency started charging for fares. When the service first opened, it was fare-free until there were some concerns about some people exploiting the fare-free option. So fares began being charged. However, you can see we still had some really good ridership along the corridor, and it's exceeded 1 million trips in fiscal 23 alone. And the operating cost for the system is 60% less of the system-wide average. So it's been a very popular service. And the way that the service is operating, it runs between St. Petersburg downtown and the beaches on these First Avenue pairs. The city is bifurcated by what's called Central Avenue. And north of Central Avenue is a one-way street that heads to the beach. South of Central Avenue is a one-way street that heads to the downtown area. So prior to the development of the Sunrunner system, there were 3 one-way lanes with on-street parking and some substandard bike lanes. The AADT was about 14,000 on each direction. And there were about 824 crashes a year. We looked at this the 12 months prior to construction. And the signals on these roads were timed for progression, where you knew if you started downtown St. Pete, you could get out to the beach pretty quickly because the signals were just timed in such a great way to shoot you across the city as fast as possible. We had a lot of crashes along this corridor because it was a bit of a free-for-all, and it was definitely a concern when we looked at implementing this transit service. This is a picture from that same vantage point post-construction. The First Avenue pairs were converted to from 3 lanes to 2 lanes one way, and then a bus and turn lane was added with pigmented pavement. There were some parking spaces that were removed, and the bike lanes were removed. I will note that about 5 blocks south of here is the Pinellas Trail. It runs parallel, so bicycle traffic was shifted over to the Pinellas Trail and also to the Central Avenue corridor just north of here. The AADT did decrease a bit from 14,000 down to 12,000. So we did see a little bit of traffic kind of disperse. St. Petersburg has a fantastic grid system. So, you know, if there's a crash on 1st, you can go up to 5th or 9th or 13th or 30th. There are a lot of options to get around the city. So the AADT dropping only about 2,000 a day isn't very significant. But what we did see is that the total crashes, the 12 months after compared to the 12 months post-construction, decreased from over 800 to just under 600. And the severity of those crashes also decreased substantially as well. So introducing these bus and turn lanes, the pigmented pavement, obviously there's still going to be some people that don't follow the rules and cut into them to pass traffic. However, it's really helped to slow cars down. It makes the space feel less wide. So we've seen people slow down. The signal progression is still also timed for that progression across the city, but there is some transit signal priority for the transit vehicles. And you know, if you speed through here, you just hit every single red light. Whereas if you actually go the speed limit, you're going to kind of progressively move through the city without much of an issue. This is just some of the crash data that we've shown. We've seen a significant reduction in angle crashes, which that's kind of, you know, one of our most typically severe crashes. With the corridor not being as wide, we're seeing fewer people kind of trying to cut all the way across, seeing it in stages now with those bus and turn lanes and then slowly making their way across. So seeing those crash numbers come down, specifically the severe crashes, has been a really positive impact of the service going in. So some of those key takeaways, again, we're seeing some diversion of traffic to the parallel roadways, but we have a network that is able to absorb that, so it hasn't been very significant. We've seen those crash numbers come down since the service has been implemented, reduction in the crash severity. The motorist travel times, they've remained pretty stable. We've definitely heard some complaints and some grumbling. But when you look at the data, it basically takes almost the same amount of time. I think it added about 30 seconds for you to get all the way from downtown St. Petersburg to the west side of town post-construction compared to pre-construction. So that travel time trade-off with safety has been a really big positive. And this service has proven to be very, very popular, especially during special events where parking may be limited in downtown. We've seen people start to park in the neighborhoods up towards the west side of town. They'll hop on the Sunrunner for, $2.50 or even for free on some special events, take it into downtown, and then PSTA, our local transit provider, is now working to kind of backfill and add plug buses because it has been such a popular service to run, especially for Rays games and other special events. So we did one other safety project that I wanted to highlight. We did a geofencing campaign, and this was mirrored on an FDOT project, and the goal was to really change driver behavior and improve safety. So this was a 6-month effort. And we targeted a corridor that was on our high injury network. This is our Park Boulevard corridor. Our high injury network, we see 40% of our killed and serious injury crashes on just 2.7% of our roads. So we chose Park Boulevard because we had Bluetooth equipment. The speed limit was 40 to 45, which is pretty indicative of most of the roads around here in Pinellas County. There were no bicycle facilities. We had a lot of low income and minority communities. And we utilized the WeGeo data to get travel speeds and hard braking. And then also we went with this corridor because we had such great support from the law enforcement agencies along the corridor. So what we did is this was really a targeted education campaign, first and foremost. And we geofenced the corridor, and anyone that drove through it, we had it set up. I don't know the mechanics of it, but there was a social media push where these little infographics would get pushed to your cell phone if you were scrolling Facebook or Instagram or X, and they would pop up and they would ask you if you want to take a quick quiz. We tried to not brand it as a survey because everyone does surveys. So we just had about 5 or 6 questions where we asked, do you know what the average cost of a traffic citation is for speeding? And they got to choose from, I think, 3 options. And if they got it right, yay. If not, there's really no, benefit or anything bad that happened to them. But we were hoping to kind of get the information out, to just get people to think about some of the impacts of driving quickly and speeding through a corridor. We also did a press and media push. And overall, we reached about 100,000 people through this campaign. These are just some of the examples of some of those quiz questions. The fine for the speeding ticket. We also asked about the leading cause of fatal crashes. Again, just trying to get people to think about what happens when you drive quickly. And we did find that the graphics that we used, if they had like a moving vehicle or something moving on the graphic, people were much more likely to select them than if it was a static image. So we were able to adjust partway through the campaign. In addition to the education, we also had targeted enforcement. The Pinellas Park Police Department was a fabulous partner. They had their cars out there almost every day of the week for hours at a time, just pulling people over. It was, I think, maybe one of their favorite things to do in their town. But they did 53% of the traffic stops resulted in citations, with 14% for speeding. But it also resulted in safety belt violations and other violations that could cause or worsen a crash. And the results were pretty positive. As you can see in the top row, we went from just over 40% of vehicles were driving over 5 miles an hour over the speed limit when we started in May. By October, that had dropped to 19%. Another point along the corridor, it went from about 31% speeding down to 15% speeding. However, as soon as we stopped the campaign and the officers left the corridor, those numbers went right back up again. And people just continued to speed as much as they felt comfortable doing. And that's when we realized, education and enforcement are great, but if you don't change the engineering of a corridor, people will drive as fast as they're comfortable. Crashes did decrease during the pilot. However, as soon as it stopped, again, they just went right back up to normal. We actually dove into a study from the AAA Foundation, and they did something very similar and came to the exact same results. So what we've done from this is we've committed as an agency to use our planning dollars to fund before and after studies for major projects that we have helped fund through the MPO process. So far, it's been our Complete Streets projects, but we're about to roll out construction funding for some active transportation improvements. And we're going to be doing before and after on traffic impacts and also land use impacts of all of the investments that we're making. So there were some benefits, though, from this geofencing campaign. Just by running the geofence, we had 4,100 survey/quiz responses. That does not usually happen in the MPO planning world, trying to get people to respond to a survey. So the fact that this was just a quick quiz and the geofence was really, really helpful in us targeting people that were traveling to and through the corridor. We've since used those geofences in other planning studies to target people, and we've had similar, just fantastic results. And we also were able to strengthen our relationship with our local law enforcement office. So while it didn't really help improve safety short term, there were some great, kind of benefits that came out of this project. And we're happy that we went through the learning process. Here's my contact information. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Lori.
Thank you, Chelsea.
Thank you.
And Laura, I'm just waiting for my slides to come up.
All right, I think Rachel will hand over control. Oh, you have it?
And yes, and I've got control. All right, thanks again. And again, my name is Lori Trebitz. I'm going to be going over one of our success stories about a pedestrian safety project that we have here in the Orlando area using different speed management tools. So I'll go over a little bit about the project in its existing condition or previous condition, the different speed management strategies that we used, some of the specific design considerations that we had, and then good, just lessons learned, best practices on projects like this. And then, of course, the big one is the results. Did it work? So this section of Orange Blossom Trail, or OBT, is a 1 mile segment from Holden Avenue to 34th Street. It's a 6-lane curb and gutter divided facility. Prior to our project, it was posted 40 miles an hour. With all of the speed management that we incorporated in this project, we did drop the posted speed to 30 miles an hour. That was our target speed. It's a context classification C4, so it's a very urban arterial. There were already 3 existing mid-block crossings with pedestrian hybrid beacons, or PHBs, and 12 existing Lynx transit stops. So very heavy transit use corridor. Along with that, some other characteristics of the corridor, it is a lower income and multifamily housing neighborhood with a lot of attractors and generators of bikes and peds on both sides of the road, and very, very high vehicular traffic volumes that we had to work with. So this, a few years ago, this 1 mile segment was identified as the most dangerous road in District 5 for bicyclists and pedestrians. So we had been trying to improve this corridor for close to 20 years. Starting back in 2007, we first put in 3 mid-block crossings. A few years later, we put in a raised median. It was previously a 7-lane section. A few years after that, we dropped the posted speed from 45 to 40. And then in 2020, we added the PHBs at the 3 existing crossings right before we got started on the design of our OBT project. So you can see from the graph that regardless, of what we were doing, those bike ped crashes and fatalities continued to either rise or stay steady. So we were tasked with developing a project that was going to put bikes and peds at the forefront and basically use any speed management tool we had available or not available at the time to try to improve this corridor and really make some drastic changes. So you'll see that everything that we incorporated in this project is encouraging our drivers to lower their speeds, but also encourage our pedestrians to use the facilities along the corridor properly and safely. because it's on all of our users to use the road safely. All right, so we have the FDOT Design Manual, or FDM, where we do have a speed management chapter available to us. And there are 3 main strategies that we use, those being enclosure, engagement, and deflection. So enclosure gives you visual feedback that your space is narrowing, and so you feel like you need to slow down. It almost can give you the illusion that you're going faster than you are. Engagement gives you these cues that something is happening and you need to be aware of your surroundings, and again, start slowing your speeds. Deflection is either horizontal or vertical movement of the driver. So any change in direction that would be uncomfortable for the driver under speeding conditions, and therefore, again, hopefully encourage the driver to slow down. So that first one, enclosure, with this project, we installed 3 additional mid-block crossings for a total of 6 mid-block crossings within 1 mile, all of which are PHB, so pedestrian activated. The PHB mast arms, this big thing in the median, it does kind of offer like a spot location of enclosure, but the main enclosure elements along the project are the fencing and landscaping that you can kind of see in the median there. What it does is gives a sort of tunneling effect to the drivers. So again, feeling enclosed, feeling narrow, feeling like it is uncomfortable if you were to speed versus if that corridor is just wide open. The other purpose of the fencing and the landscaping then is to channel our pedestrians to those safe designated crossings. And the next one is engagement. So again, engagement is going to come from those PHBs that are activated by the PEDs at all of the mid-block crossings. But we also have in-pavement crosswalk pavement markings to let the driver know that it's coming up. We have in-road lighting at all of the crosswalks. Again, I talked about we dropped the speed from 40 to 30 miles an hour. So we did install those speed feedback signs on either end of the project limits. And then the landscaping in the median. So all of these elements have to work together to keep the driver's attention on the road and any of these changing elements happening around them. But the key is without overloading the driver with too much information that they might possibly get distracted. So it is a balance. And then last is deflection. So those 6 crossing opportunities that we incorporated have both types of deflections. We have very, very tight right-of-way on this project, and so we couldn't introduce any sort of real deflection or chicaning. So we worked with what we had. We kind of put in a horizontal deflection just through restriping, which you can kind of see in the picture in the bottom. So basically just in advance of each of the crosswalks, we restriped to squeeze all of the travel lanes down to 10 feet to, again, feel narrow, feel tight, slow them down, just in the influence of those crossings. And then we transitioned back to existing travel lanes after that. These are also raised crosswalks, so they also have a vertical deflection. Again, both things kind of give the driver a sense that they are deviating from their normal path of travel, which prompts that lower speed. And it's worth noting that the raised crosswalks were something very new that we were doing on a multi-lane state facility. So coordination with both transit agencies and emergency services is really important on projects like this to make sure that they're meeting the needs of any special vehicles. And reducing conflict points. This is not really a speed management thing, but just a good best practice that, for any just general bike and ped safety is reduce conflict points. So we did look for any opportunity to reduce radial returns at side streets to slow down any right turning vehicles. We reduced driveway widths and consolidated driveways where we could. Anything to limit pedestrian exposure in the roadway. All right, and I mentioned in-road lighting briefly, so I just wanted to show a picture of kind of what that looks like at night. So the lights are actually in the pavements. This one just shows a yellow string, but there is a run of yellow as well as red lights that mimic the PHB signal head above. So what that signal head does is it's going to flash yellow, go solid red on the signal heads above, as well as in the pavement. Again, just to bring more awareness to the peds and the crosswalk to those drivers. Some other design considerations I mentioned, design vehicles, really, really important to work with emergency services and transit, and if your project has any other special vehicle needs. Approach speeds and appropriate context. Not all of these speed management techniques are a one-size-fits-all. They're not the right context for all roadways, so it needs to make sense for your project. Making sure that you're working towards that target speed. Holistic approach, just meaning, you know, no one speed management technique is going to likely make a very drastic change. They are meant to work in series. They're meant to be layered to really make some big changes. And then specifically for the raised crosswalks too, just designing around driveways, side streets, the logistics of fitting them in and accommodating any existing drainage patterns. And some more is with specifically the raised crosswalks. So like I said, that was a new thing that we were piloting on a multi-lane high traffic volume state roadway. With anything, when you introduce something unfamiliar to the local stakeholders, public, you want to gain local support. You need to work with your partners because at the end of the day, they are the people that are driving that corridor every day, and they need to be comfortable with it. And the whole reason we're doing it is for their safety, you know, and their operations. And we want to make sure that we hear them out and they are supporting the project. That goes through design and construction because your stakeholders can always change. Coordinate early with, you know, we were working with developmental standards specifically on the raised crosswalks. So work through those standards, specifications, special pay items, special plan details, work through all of that in design. And then education and enforcement is really important. We had our District 5 Office of Safety do multiple outreach events, educating people on what was coming and why we were doing it, the purpose behind it. We handed out PHB tip cards, we did social media videos, and then we worked with our local law enforcement as well. The picture on the left is representing what kind of the developmental standards were that we were working with. We modified them quite a bit to meet the needs on OBT. We made the table a little bit shorter from 4.5 inches to 3.5 inches. We made the transitions to the table up a little bit more gradual, just again, very, very high volumes of traffic along this road. And then we made the table longer from 12 feet to 23 feet, specifically to accommodate our Lynx buses so that their wheelbase to wheelbase could stage on the table and not be straddling those transitions when they're at their stops trying to pick up and drop off their riders. Some lessons learned, some things that we really had to dig in and think about when you're doing something new. A lot of it had to do with the temporary traffic control phasing, not necessarily the design itself. So if you are dropping posted speeds, it's important to drop early on in the project, or we felt it was on OBT, that you start getting your drivers used to it. You want to make sure all of the pavement markings and signs are installed prior to any new elements being open, like the raised crosswalks. And just make sure that you keep the public informed of when these are coming. You know, nobody wants to feel surprised that the corridor that they drive every single day is all of a sudden changing and nobody informed them. So, communication is always important on the projects that we do. We also installed temporary rumble strips on either end of the project. We didn't want to take any chances. Yes, there's signs and barrels, and everybody should know that they're about to come through a construction zone, but we wanted to take it one step further because those rumble strips, if you're going any sort of speed, they definitely get your attention. Pavement drop-offs, raised crosswalks are greater than 3 inches in height typically. So, that exceeds acceptable drop-off conditions where you can put in an asphalt wedge. So for OBT, we were very specific about phasing that even though this is a 6-lane facility, each 3-lane section had to be built in its entirety before we could open it up to the traffic. And constructability is what it is. You got to think about how these things are going to get built when they're new, right? So something we had to think about was handwork versus paving operations. We are trying to get this project built as quickly as possible. It's a safety project. Larger raised crosswalks like what we did in OBT were able to use paving equipment versus handwork, so that did save us some time and money. Procurement of specialty items. We were piloting different things. So there were materials and such that our contractors were maybe unfamiliar with getting. They had to meet very specific specs. So trying to phase our project in a way that allowed for those long lead times was really important in getting materials. These are very kind of in the weeds about the design and construction, but planning ahead for some of these challenges and delays that we were anticipating did help achieve an overall successful project. All right, so the results. You have to go back, you do all of these things, and it's really important to go back and determine, did it actually work? That's why we do it. So speed data along OBT was collected prior to, during, and after construction. Overall, there was at least a 5-mile-an-hour reduction in average speeds to the corridor from pre to post construction. So while we did not exactly meet our target speed of 30 miles an hour, it was enough to have significant safety improvements along the project, which was the ultimate goal. So Vision Zero, which is what we are about at FDOT, is not necessarily zero crashes. It's about zero serious crashes, life-changing crashes. So prior to construction, there was an average of 200 crashes per year along this 1-mile stretch. And the 1 year that this has been constructed, it just completed construction October of 2023. We reduced that by approximately 50% overall crashes. There was an average of 7 bike ped crashes per year. In the 1 year that this has been built, there has been 4, but prior to, 40% of those crashes, bike ped only crashes, were resulting in serious injury and fatality. And in the 1 year, I can happily say that there has been 0 serious injuries or fatalities for bike peds along this corridor. So we're really, really happy to see that. With those crashes that were happening, the majority of the crashes were happening because our peds were walking outside of a designated crosswalk. And now when we pull the forms and see what's happening out there, they are using those designated crossings. So again, very, very happy to see that. This did recently win a SASHTO award for safety. And so overall, we're just very proud of the results of the OBT project. Since construction began, more and more projects in our district are proposing similar treatments. And we just hope to keep seeing these crash statistics come down and this be, maybe more of the norm on some of our more dangerous roads. So thank you. And I think my contact information is on the last slide if anybody has any questions about the OBT project. And I will turn it over to Fernando. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. Perfect. Well, good morning from sunny Los Angeles, California. It's still morning on our side, but Fernando Navarrete, legislative coordinator, as mentioned earlier. Just a little bit about the LA Department of Transportation here in LA. We are the lead transportation planning, project delivery, and operations department for the city of LA. Our department is made up of 1,300 civil servants, including 600 traffic officers. We manage 52 different transportation services in the region, from parking management to safety improvements to permits for private mobility operators. Our department is tasked with a number of things for the city of LA. A little bit about our own government structure. We're made up of 15 council districts ranging from the San Fernando Valley up until the south of Los Angeles, East LA, and then West LA. Each council district has about 250,000 constituents, and our mayor is elected at large. We have a strong council structure, which inherently makes our mayor structure weak, meaning it is a linear approach to how we govern or how we are governed rather, which gives our council members in each district a lot more power, which is a lot different, for example, to our two counterpart largest cities, Chicago and New York, where they each have 50 council members approximately. Our population here in LA is just over 4 million residents, making us the second largest city in the country. But our entire county of Los Angeles is 10 million, which is an important fact to understand because at any given time, that influx of traffic travels throughout our streets. And that makes us also the largest county in the entire nation. So we're huge, huge city, huge county. Why is this important to mention? Well, LA is 469 square miles, compared to the largest city in the country, New York, which is 305 square miles. It's needless to say, LA is a massive city. And our networks is vast and it expands, like I mentioned, throughout the region. And this, of course, presents its own set of challenges for speed management, particularly in a city that has such deep roots in driving and car culture at the same time. Of course, our size and complicated network makes it difficult to see significant change really on a large scale that will allow us to make a significant dent in the city as a whole. Whether it's pursuing, reconfigurations, installing bike infrastructure or bus only lanes, these improvements that we know save lives are always met with a certain level of skepticism from both the public side and even in some cases on the side of our elected officials. So it is a challenging task, and I will add that in LA we have a number of different communities from our Korean population, our Chinatown area, East LA, primarily Latino population, and everything in between, making it that community engagement a little bit complicated in terms of that community outreach when we go out for projects. In 2015, our former Mayor Eric Garcetti, signed Executive Directive number 10 for Vision Zero, with the goal to eliminate traffic fatalities by 2025, which in the last few weeks, I've been reminded that we're only a few weeks away from meeting that deadline of 2025. And, unfortunately for us, last year in 2023 was the deadliest year on record for traffic deaths in LA. 337 fatalities on our roads. In fact, in 2023, LA had more traffic fatalities than we did homicides. And the leading cause of death countywide for people under 30. Let that sink in for a little bit. Last year, there were more traffic fatalities than there were homicides in the city of LA for the first time in our entire history. That was definitely a very difficult pill to swallow for us. Of course, where we deliver safe street designs, we see a reduction in high-end speeding, average speeding, and crashes. But citywide, these individual projects have really not reversed the trend. And because of this stark reality, our city pursued a number of state legislative goals to complement the work that we were already doing on the ground. Although state legislation is just one part of our approach to improving safety, as we succeed at changing some of the laws holding us back from achieving our safety goals, we're also increasing our project delivery. And this by no way will substitute any of those projects that we'll continue to do. In fact, pursuing our legislative goals just adds more tools to our tool belt. And the two primary goals that I'm talking about that we had now for at least a decade was one, reforming speed limit setting statewide, and then number two, enabling speed safety cameras to better enforce speed limits. These were identified as two of the primary statewide policy goals by a Zero Traffic Fatalities Task Force that was created by our state legislature rather. For context, the California Vehicle Code has relied heavily on the 85th percentile to set speeds for decades. Under the 85th percentile, cities are required to set and update speed limits based on how fast 85% of drivers are driving in order for them to be enforceable. Just after, we launched our Vision Zero. Many of our speed surveys expired, and when we went to reestablish speed limits, we found that a significant majority were going to increase by at least 5 miles per hour, some even more. So we had this unusual situation where we were starting to get serious about improving safety, but at the same time, we're going to have to increase speed limits in order to make streets enforceable, which is a dilemma. It really made it an impossible choice for our elected officials to make a decision, either increase the legal speed limit to make sure drivers are held accountable, or leave it at a safer limit, knowing that there will be no real mechanism for accountability. But the 85th percentile reform has been a goal for many of our community advocates, for community stakeholders who for a number of years have been doing the groundwork, which inherently for us as a city and as a department became one of our top legislative priorities statewide. Our first attempt led to the task force that made several recommendations, including reforming the 85th percentile. Ultimately, it failed. Our second attempt proposed several specific changes to the 85% percentile without completely repealing, although it didn't make it through the entire legislature. But third time's a charm. In 2023, Assembly Bill 43, sponsored by former Assemblymember Laura Friedman, was signed into law in October. Sorry, in 2021, it was signed. It became law on January 2023. So what is AB 43? AB 43 ensures that cities in California will not have to raise speed limits unless engineering changes have been made with the express purpose of increasing speeds. In LA, where we've raised speed limits on nearly 200 miles of streets, cities in California would also be able to restore previous speed limits on streets that were not modified to increase streets. So why were we successful the third time around? Well, for one, we established what's now a 501c6 organization known as the California Cities Transportation Initiative, or CACTA in short. This organization here in California is made up of the 8 largest cities in California: San Francisco, Oakland, Fresno, Sacramento, Long Beach, San Jose, San Diego, and Los Angeles, working together collectively to pursue our legislative goals gave us more power as an organization. The second point, we had a strong coalition of voices speaking for themselves. We have typical opposition from organizations like AAA, our own police unions, but the legislatures were often hiding behind statewide equity voices like the ACLU concern with lowered speeds. That lowered speeds could lead to tickets given we see those primarily in poor communities of color, which were obviously very much valid concerns. But our strategy was to lean in on those advocates that were already doing the groundwork. Advocates in South LA, in the Valley, in East LA, in Central Los Angeles, that had real life experiences to share with our state legislature, and a lot of times the voices that are least heard up in Sacramento. So we made sure that as part of our strategy, we tapped into those voices, people who we knew here at home and really knew throughout the entire state who wanted to have their voices heard. Um, we went to the San Fernando Valley, the largest population in the entire city of LA. And we asked advocates, what do you need from us? And they simply said, we wanted slower speeds and safer streets. Again, bringing in those voices that are traditionally not heard. And the final point, we brought in faith-based groups. Um, a lot of the stories we heard were parents who lost children, real constituents here in the city of LA, with real life stories who flew. We helped fly to Sacramento, to our capital, to really testify in committee, share their stories, and really have the legislature hear from them, providing their testimony and their lived experience, and a lot of the times the grief that they felt when losing a loved one to high speeds on our streets. Um, as a result, we were able to immediately repeal speed limit increases that we had previously made, lowering speed limits to nearly 200 miles of streets in the entire city of LA. That was AB 43. Our second legislative priority was automated speed enforcement cameras. Similar to AB 43, we followed a very similar strategy to pursue another task of another recommendation of our task force, which is speed safety cameras. Um, and I'm happy to share that last year we were successful um, in leading this effort. Again, um, thanks to really the leadership of former Assembly Member Laura Friedman, who just recently, as of a few weeks ago, became one of our newest members of Congress. And that's one point that I do want to emphasize when tapping into your elected officials, your state legislature. I cannot emphasize enough how important it is to have a champion in the legislature, in your local elected offices. Working with elected officials who see the vision, who understand the problem, and want to find solutions can really go a long way. Again, working with our partner cities and cacti, and following the model and working with our community advocates, we were successful in getting AB 645, better known here in California as the Speed Safety System Pilot. So what is AB 645? So well, we have the 5 pilot cities in California. We have until 2032 to implement, operate, and evaluate a full 5-year pilot program. These pilot programs, these speed safety cameras, are focused on 3 locations: schools, street where there's been reported street racing by the local enforcement agency, and our high injury network. We're really only limited to those 3 locations. Each city is limited to a number of cameras where they can place during the pilot program. This is all based on census tracts and population. For LA, being that we are the largest city in the state, we're limited to 125 segments of cameras on our streets. They're required to identify those locations through a public process, justify their selection, and engage community before they are installed, which was a key component when folks who were opposing this bill, like the ACLU, wanted to make sure that they brought community in. Particularly, they were concerned with communities here in Los Angeles that have historically been over surveilled, like our communities in South LA, which is an important point. The bill requires signage at every location and a 60-day warning period after new cameras are installed in our street segments. The bill informs pilot design aimed at addressing the most reckless driving. So tickets are only issued for going 11 miles per hour over the recorded speed limit, and can only exceed the $100 for drivers speeding for more than 25 miles per hour above the posted speed limits. Another component is that tickets are civil penalties and not criminal penalties. Again, another key component that the ACLU was advocating for. And the thought process is that they do not want to put any points on your license and really impact insurance rates. Another important point in this is that qualifying low-income drivers are eligible for up to 80% of reduced payment. This obviously was a very highly contested just issue in general by a number of civil rights groups, and this is ultimately what the author of the bill came up with in order to meet those demands. The program is expected to be cost recoverable, and any additional revenue is required to be reinvested into our streets, our safe street design. The goal with this program for us and the rest of the pilot cities was never to make the program revenue generating, but rather our goal, and it continues to be our goal, to change the driving behavior in our 5 pilot cities. And finally, the bill prohibits any facial recognition, restricts the cameras to still photo footage, and does not allow our law enforcement agencies to access our camera systems without a subpoena or warrant. And these were very strict limitations on data retention, which was important to the author and the advocates. For us at DOT, we knew that any subsequent program would need to adhere to the following commitments when it comes to speed safety cameras. First, the program must be designed to generate compliance, and like I said, not revenue. Two, locations selected must ensure equitable outcomes. This is to maximize safety benefits without any burden. Third, the program revenue must be reinvested into into communities, which again is a large portion of what the bill calls for. And once our program is stand up, that is our intended purpose again. Fourth, our camera program must respect and protect individual privacy. Again, facial recognition must be prohibited in our camera systems, and is solely used for the purpose of issuing citations and not to be shared with law enforcement. And lastly, our programs rely on a robust education and outreach program. Any speed safety camera program will include advance notice of camera placement. We have a task to do community outreach and activities throughout the community, ensuring that there is a significant grace period during which only warnings will be issued when the program is stood up. why were we successful after so many attempts with automated speed enforcement? Similar to AB 43, advocacy groups played a large part in all of our 5 pilot cities. Again, tapping into faith-based groups here in South LA. One of our most known pastors, Pastor Patricia, or Pastor Pat as she's known, had strong and compelling testimony that she shared multiple times with our transportation committee in Sacramento, about the story she saw in front of her church and people, being ran over, kids not being safe on her own streets in South LA. Another example is Damien with the group Streets Are for Everyone or Safe. Damien, a number of years ago, was a subject to a hit and run where the vehicle dragged him for nearly 500 feet, which eventually led to his left foot completely being amputated. Today, Damien leads Safer Streets Are for Everyone, and advocating up in Sacramento for these changes. So it's really impactful when you have folks with these strong stories and again, real life experiences testifying in front of committee, telling their own stories, and sharing, the pain they felt in their experiences. Um, our partner cities, like I said, Cacti, made up of the 8 largest cities in California, having, our priorities set before our legislature convenes and figuring out what our priorities are, and speaking with one voice was super impactful, and led to our success. Um, Finding a champion in the legislature was important. And one thing that I'll mention is that relationships among departments and elected officials should be reciprocal and not transactional, right? I think that leads to a much lengthier relationship, and again, one that feels less transactional. And at least for our sake, those outcomes as far as these bills have been really positive, and it's the same. It was the same elected official who championed both of these um, statewide bills. Like LADOT and here in LA, like many cities, we're dealing with budget shortfalls, obviously not enough staffing to keep up with the demand that we have. And we are pushing through this process and working as hard as we possibly could, even with the constraints that we have. We're currently as part of this AB 645 and speed safety program. We will be bringing in a consultant on board to help us stand the program again because we simply don't have the staffing capacity, and we hope to begin procurement at some time early next year. All while at the same time, you probably heard Los Angeles is hosting the 2028 Olympic and Paralympic Games, which has made it a little bit um, challenging in juggling these various priorities that the city has. Nonetheless, we're poised to stand up the program early next year. And with our Vision Zero nearing, as I mentioned earlier, our 2025 deadline here in Los Angeles, we're reassessing our program and figuring out what has worked, what has not. But I will tell you that both AB 43 on speed reductions and AB 645 will definitely play a key component in the future of our Vision Zero program. And lastly, as we look to the future, for us at DOT, keeping Angelino safe will continue to be our top priority. And we look forward to continuing to advocate for lower speeds, um, and educating drivers by prioritizing tools for change behavior. So thank you so much. I hope this was helpful. And with that, Laura, I will kick it back to you.
All right, thanks so much, Fernando, and thank you, Lori and Chelsea as well for sharing your stories with us today. Excellent food for thought for those of us here in Central Florida and beyond that are pursuing safety goals. We are sort of right at the end of our time, but we've had a few questions that have come in through the Q&A box that we're going to try and address. If any of you have others you'd like to add, go ahead. We'll go for a few minutes over. If you have to leave, you can always come to our YouTube page and catch the tail end of the webinar. We will have that up for you. So our first question was for you, Chelsea. It says, for Fort Pinellas, have you implemented transit exclusive lanes on state roads? If yes, how is that coordinated with FDOT?
We have not. We did have a project that was going to have bus and turn lanes on the state road. It was full speed ahead, actually under construction, and we were asked to stop the project because of some concerns with the reallocation of space on state roads. So we do not have any success with that approach. I know that there are some new statewide guidelines out on how to move forward with a project like that. But given the requirements that would have to be met, including transit ridership levels that are quite high that we just don't experience in Pinellas County, I don't foresee us doing that in Pinellas anytime soon.
Okay, thank you. All right, Lori, we have one coming up for you, but before that, there was a question that came in about what OBT stands for. That's Orange Blossom Trail, which is the roadway that Lori was talking about during her presentation. Now, the question, Lori, for the OBT project, what other countermeasures do you think FDOT could have implemented to lower the operating speed even more within the existing right-of-way constraints?
I think that was the key within existing right-of-way, made it very, very difficult. So again, that was, 6-lane curb and gutter, raised median. And then it was a 8-foot sidewalk, from back of curb to right-of-way. So there's already existing landscaping in the sidewalk as well. We had briefly talked about doing some sort of fencing, landscaping on the roadside as well. If we had more right of way, I think that that's something that we would have done. I talked about the enclosure being, trying to create that tunneling effect of tightening up the typical to make people feel like it is uncomfortable to go in fast conditions. But unfortunately, we just couldn't make it work. Tons and tons of utilities on an arterial like Orange Blossom Trail as well. There's existing landscaping at the back of sidewalks. So when you start putting other vertical elements in the sidewalk, now you're reducing your effective sidewalk width. There's no bike facilities on OBT. So we have both our bikes and peds using those, that wide sidewalk. So I think we really tried to throw everything we had at OBT with, trying to keep budget, schedule, right away, all of that in mind. It was tough.
Great. Thank you, Lori. All right, then Fernando, we have one for you. It says, Fernando, can you share preliminary results from the speed camera pilot and what role has law enforcement played?
So we still not yet stood up our program. We're in the phase of bringing a consultant, so we will have a task order solicitation released hopefully in the next couple of weeks, made public. There are some requirements from the bill, including, like I mentioned, that community engagement piece that we'll have to adhere to first. We'll also have to identify the 125 networks where we'll be placing the cameras. So that's something that we will have to propose to our city council, and they would have to vote and adopt that before we can move forward. So as you can imagine, although this is a great program, there is a lot of specifics that we need to make sure that we get through here locally first through our elected offices before we can send up the program. But we're hoping that early next year we will be successful in that. I know our counterparts in San Francisco will be, I think, the first of the 5 pilot cities to stand up the program. And I think more so the difference with them is that they outright decided to go directly for locations surrounding schools. Ours is a little bit more complicated here in LA, again, because of just the size, but also there is a lot of interest within our council districts on this program. And again, we only have 125 systems to work with. So
All right, thanks, Fernando. And I think that was the last question that we had come in, so go ahead and wrap up. First, want to say a major thank you to our 3 panelists. You guys did a fantastic job today. And thanks to all of you who contributed to the webinar. And for those of you who are working on bringing an end to traffic fatalities and serious injuries nationwide. We appreciate your interest in eliminating traffic deaths and serious injuries. And we know that it will take all of us working together to make it happen. Before we wrap, a few housekeeping items. First, as I noted before, a recording of this webinar will be up on the Metro Plan Orlando YouTube channel. And we've dropped the link in the chat a few times if you want to check that out or share it with those who were not able to join us today. We saw a few of you request if a PDF of today's PowerPoint presentation will be available. I think those who requested already gotten an email. Any others would like to have that, you can reach out to info@metroplanorlando.gov and let us know you'd like to have that. We can send that your way. I also wanted to note that our Vision Zero Safety Speaker Series is going to resume in early 2025 with a range of traffic safety related topics. And if you have ideas for a topic that you would like to see covered as a part of the speaker series, please go ahead and email your suggestions to us at visionzero@metroplanorlando.gov. I think we're dropping that one in the chat as well. And if you would like to continue to follow the progress of Vision Zero Central Florida or get notifications about future speaker series events, you can go ahead and sign up for our constant contact email updates at visionzerocfl.gov. In the meantime, we hope you'll join us on this quest to reach zero traffic deaths in Central Florida and beyond, and do your part to work for a safer transportation system. We can get to zero together. Thank you so much and have a great day.